Hello,
Hi,
I'm Alex,
and I'm Val.
and here we are talking about Sopranos.
We talk about Sopranos a lot. We are watching this show for like the sixth-ish time on average.
Somethingth time.
And we decided that this go around, and we're married, so we live together, and so we decided when we're watching this show, we are going to watch it, take some notes, and then record a podcast immediately after.
Yeah, so instead of watching the show and immediately talking about and reflecting on it, we just do the
amongst
exact
ourselves.
same thing in front of a microphone and share it.
Yeah, so that's really it. It's that's what our podcast is. So I don't know if you guys like it, but if you do,
Let us know.
let us know. If you don't,
Some of you have. We haven't heard anybody not liking it.
I mean,
but there's time.
Yeah, there's still time. We'd love to hear what you think, or if there's anything you think that we should talk about.
Or can do better.
Always looking to improve ourselves in 2019.
Yeah, exactly.
We're going to talk about season 4, episode 8.
Mergers and acquisitions.
And we're getting towards the back end of the season already.
Yeah.
Which has been an interesting season.
It's an interesting season.
I'm excited for us to do, with season 3, we just started to do like a season wrap-up episode.
Yeah.
And now I kind of I'm still thinking a lot about the individual episodes, but I'm also thinking about the whole arc of seasons and stuff like that.
Yeah, and season 4 is interesting. It's a little bit fragmented in that every episode kind of, for a bit here, is kind of standing alone and not really propelling the narrative forward that much.
Yeah.
They're these kind of self-contained stories, and everything is on a relatively small scale.
Well, and interestingly, we have a lot of these episodes that David Chase is involved in, that we have these teams of writers,
Yeah, we have David Chase, we have Green and Burgess, Terrence Winter, and they're all kind of coming up with the stories. Even though the teleplay is by Lawrence Connor, there's this kind of teamwork that's happening in the writer's room to kind of come up with what the plot will be.
And I think we had a really similar team last week.
Yeah, it's been happening this season.
Yeah, so it's interesting in terms of the story, right? Because again, kind of what is the story over the course of this season? We actually don't get a ton of clarity on that until the very end. And there are some standout episodes, next episode is a standout. This season finale is a standout.
It is artful, though, because it seems like nothing is happening, and yet there are small things that are propelling us towards the end of the season. And the writers do have an idea of what the goal is in season 4, and there are things that are happening in this episode, for example, that are moving us towards that large climax.
Yeah, no, totally. I think this episode, there were a lot of lines or a lot of scenes that, again, kind of like we were talking about with Christopher as an episode, or I think it was The Wait where we were talking about that again, that there's kind of this, I don't mean it in a negative way when I say heavy-handedness, because I think the way that Sopranos does it works, but we definitely have some lines that are pointing to some of these larger issues in a really kind of heavy-handed way.
What are some examples of that in this episode for you?
Well, I was thinking about Tony writing some of these cards, some of the things that people say, right? So Tony writes this card it was great while it lasted, which is kind of one of these larger Sopranos kind of messages where it's there's nothing, there's nothing out there after this, so not embrace it while you can, but there is
or that
kind
we've
of
come in at the end, that the best is behind us.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I'm just looking through my notes. When Furio's uncle, I guess, says he lived a long life, had lots of women, right? Kind of how people are remembered.
There's definitely an interesting theme of womanizing in the relationship between men and women in this episode.
Yeah. But they're just I don't know, some of these lines that are said, even when Carm comes out and says I'm not a feminist, But
yeah,
like,
there's a lot on that theme. Her reading Missive Avalon, her throwing it against the wall.
Yeah, so maybe we can talk about that a little bit.
Aid talking about how her mother always told her, a man by the way he treats a
women.
woman.
Yeah, I wrote that one down too.
Tony saying to Valentina, I already took his horse for one, which is a pretty fucked up thing to say.
Yeah, that is pretty mean.
He deserved that slap.
But then we have we even have like this artist, right? So we have Valentina asking Tony, do you have any interest in art? And then we have him go to this art dealer. Maybe we'll talk more about that scene. But, the one part I was thinking of when the artist says, like, oh, it would be a better composition without Ralphie in it. Which for me, I mean, no spoilers, but for me, it points to some other things that are going to happen this season. It also points back to the end of Pyomai, to the end of, was it last episode?
Pyomai was episode 5.
Oh.
This is episode 8.
Yeah, but it points me back to the end of Pyomai when we have Tony sitting in the stable
with Pyomai
and then the goat comes up, right? Because it is this kind of like, we talked a little bit about it, this kind of classical composition of a triangle kind of shape, right?
Yeah.
Where we have like Tony looking down. It's almost like a religious painting, right? And this goat pops in at the end, right? So I was thinking, and that was just such like an artistic shot. So it brought me back to that.
For me, there's something almost ironic about pointing out the composition. Like there's a few small little things in this episode that make it seem kind of, it kind of brings on another meaning to it. Like, first of all, Valentina's originally sold as an art dealer, or like that she works at an art gallery.
Yeah.
But she's actually not. We find out that she works at a framing store, basically. Right. Which is interesting the way that they sell her. And then they talk about, do you like art? Which obviously the creators of the show are concerned with art.
They like art,
and presenting an artistic product and thinking about a lot of the concepts of fine art. But when she actually takes them to this place of art, it's this guy who's basically just painting horses. And I think there's something about like the composition would be better is actually kind of ridiculous. Like they're just these like horse paintings in front of pastures, or like they're just kind of there. They're not, there's no kind of like deeper meaning or symbolism the way that there is in this show.
Right.
So I think it's like kind of tongue in cheek from them or something.
I think so too.
That Valentina actually is not, even though she's being kind of acclaimed as somebody coming from this sophisticated art world, it's actually a misrepresentation.
Yeah.
And I think that he's a misrepresentation too of going to, a place of art.
Yeah, and we'll see that painting.
We will see that painting.
And I'm excited for that. I just came across one of the other lines that I was thinking of. It's when Tony's in the car with Polly. And he says to him, and it's like kind of funny coming out of Tony's mouth. He's like, well, everybody's going to get old and die, right? He's saying that to Polly when Polly's talking about his mom.
Yeah.
And so again, and then, we have some flashbacks with Melfi also to talk about mothers and parenting and things like that. So I don't know. It's like there's a few things here that, and again, I don't mean heavy-handed in a negative way, but we're hammering home a few ideas in this episode based on these kind of almost little like vignettes that we get of a couple of our different characters.
Yeah, totally. I agree.
So I don't know how we want to approach this one and what we want to talk about. I do want to talk about kind of like the man-woman issues that are going on. I want to talk about, kind of like Tony's, I don't know, like what's Tony's hang up about, like, this kind of like, I don't know, like, being with someone's like being with Valentina.
Yeah, I mean, I think it
Ralphie.
Is like Valentina says, this kind of like macho code, this kind of bullshit macho code.
Yeah, or like cuckolding, like Melfi talks about it.
Yeah.
But they have this weird relationship because of it. Like,
yeah,
it's linked in with this horse rural kind of vibe, and so like because they meet there, right? They meet at the stables.
Yeah.
Tony gives her this horseshoe ring. I think it's a ring. They go to this hotel that's like a farm hotel. I don't know exactly where this hotel, like bed and breakfast, I guess, would be.
In the country.
It's like a weird farm hotel that they go and
Yeah.
stay at. And they stay at another kind of strange hotel afterwards.
Yeah.
Later
Which is
in the
different than
episode,
when we
too.
think about Where He's Gone with Gloria, where it was in the city, right? It really seemed like this like sophisticated, expensive, almost like penthouse of
Yeah.
a hotel room. So it is a different kind of environment for the relationship.
Yeah. And then, like, again, kind of like you said, like, he says, like, well, I already took his horse. Like, she's kind of linked in with this rural scene
Yeah.
that's somehow, like, important for Tony. Like, he's spending a lot of time now, like, going to visit Pyomai, right? That's when we see, it's one of the first scenes that we get is him in there with the person who takes care of the horse.
Yeah, interestingly, putting on titanium shoes, like
Right.
Tony suggested
Right.
earlier on in the season.
Yeah.
Very small piece of information, but
So it's super important.
what does it mean?
But yeah, but like she's this, I don't know. Yeah, I don't really know where to stand on it. She's clearly like pretty weird. I mean, she's a super weird character. She like really likes practical jokes, I guess. And
Yeah,
then
I mean,
and
I
then
think
we
that
know
Tony
we know
yeah.
that like in the same way, kind of like Gloria was like she kind of like attaches herself too quickly.
Yeah.
And she's like, I'm not gonna say I love you. I do that usually
Yeah.
too soon. Like
There is like
we
a
kind of know
neediness
she's crazy.
that Tony seems to be drawn to.
Yeah, and she looks like Gloria.
Yeah, and there's also like this like archetype that Tony's drawn to.
Yeah.
And I think that there is like a basic level to what he is looking for and what his attraction is. She's part Italian. We find out that she comes
Right.
from Italian Cuban stock. She has dark hair.
Yeah.
She's beautiful. I think that is almost enough. In fact, if we think back to what Tony said he needs or what he likes about Gloria, it's like, well, she's Italian, she's beautiful,
She has long legs.
long legs, so
Valentina seems pretty short, but
nonetheless, like that physical attribute is reinforced for her in her own ways.
yeah.
So those things that Tony looks for in a Gumar are there. I also think that he likes that she kind of belittles Ralphie in front of people.
Yeah,
Because Tony
he
has
laughs
such a
at that.
distaste for Ralphie that I think that he likes this weird aspect of her that kind of puts Ralphie down. And then there's something that maybe he's drawn to, like a moth to a flame of the danger.
Right, that Ralphie would find out
there was an
and-
interesting scene actually when he's calling from a payphone closer to the end of the episode by the highway. Mm-hmm. And then he gets a cell phone call from her and he's leaning on the payphone. For me, that kind of signifies the carelessness of engaging in this relationship with one of his captain's Gumars, because like he's out there being careful as a mob boss to be on a
Right.
payphone and make phone calls, and then yet he's talking on the cell phone about this delicate situation.
right.
And I think that there is an aspect of he is drawn to the danger of this relationship.
I think you're
And the
right.
fact that it's obviously problematic given his relationship, his already kind of tenuous relationship with Ralph.
Yeah, I just like I don't really get how he kind of justifies it for himself, and it's just like again, it's just like part of Tony's psychology, but I don't really see how the fact that Ralphie hasn't actually slept with her, or maybe only a few times or whatever it might be, we don't really Ralphie says one thing and Valentina says another. I trust her more than I trust Ralphie, but
Yeah.
I don't know. Like
I think there's like a power dynamic, like Tony. There's an aspect of Tony wanting to be in control. Like we examine this male-female uneven relationship. Mm-hmm. Things like Carmela saying like, I'm not a feminist, I'm not believing in 50-50.
Right.
Like this like overt lack of power balance and power domination by men in this world. And there's something maybe about like Ralphie not having that over her that doesn't belittle him. And then especially like when we think about the M part of S&M, the masochism that Ralphie shows throughout the show that we've seen with Janice, with the stuff.
with the cheese grater.
But now, yeah, we're finding out about the cheese grater, the candle wax on balls, all sorts of stuff, really.
Is that in your notes?
Let me see. Did I write down? Yep. I wrote down Ralph, cheese grater, candle wax on balls, previously dominated S&M, rooted in childhood. Welcome to my notes, everybody.
Good notes. Yeah.
But there is an aspect of that, like, we've talked in the show about how we don't really get a window into other characters' psychology often. Sometimes we do, but this is an example of Ralphie that kind of gets shut down. So that's introduced that it could be rooted in his childhood. When Tony is in the back of Crazy Horse and he's talking to him and he asks him and he's pushing about his mother, Ralph just says, gotta go, and he leaves. There's no closure to that issue. So that's kind of a classic Sopranos instance of us not learning more about that open-ended question. It remains ambiguous.
Right.
But we have this aspect of Ralphie where he needs to be dominated, where I feel like that is kind of open-ended. That could be for various reasons, but he, even though Janice says like he needs to be in control but be out of control, it's complicated. But he is this like tough guy persona, but at the same time he kind of contradicts that by needing to have the woman in his romantic relationships hurting him and damaging him, which is interesting because he is somebody who is typically seen as being dangerous, dominating others, holding power over others, but then in his personal life he wants that to happen to him.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm just trying to see, like, because there's this one part, like, when they're in the restaurant and Ralphie and Valentina come, and you can see, and it's after she's done that amazing salt joke to Tony. And
my dad did that joke.
that's such a great joke. We see that then, like, Ralphie takes the salt off the table, so we know that she's also done that to Ralphie.
Oh, I missed that.
And Tony sees that, and Tony's watching that. And so we see a couple times Tony in this episode, like, we get this kind of view into his psyche because, like, we see him watching that scene. We also see, I forget exactly when this happens, but we see him, like, see Valentina, but then we see him, like, flash back to these scenes of her with Ralphie, like them at the stable and them at the restaurant. So we get a sense of, like, his kind of, like, conundrum with this issue, right? Tony doesn't want to be the same as Ralphie, right? Like, Tony sees himself as different than Ralphie, better than Ralphie, whatever that might be.
Well, and interestingly, the way the show is presented to us is that Tony is better than Ralphie. Ralphie is kind of an antagonist throughout the course of the show. Ralph's level of mania and violence does make Tony a comparatively better person. And so there is an interesting dynamic between the two of them that we have, and I think Ralph is presented that way, and it's something that Tony is feeling as well. It makes him feel like a good person.
I also just think it's interesting too, like, how risky, like they say, like, it's risky for her to trust Ralphie to have a sense of humor. I think that's one of these things that we're supposed to, like, see between Ralphie and Tony. Like, you know, he's trying to portray himself as someone who can take a joke.
Right.
I don't know that Tony really can take a joke all that well either.
Well, these practical jokes seem to be fine.
Yeah.
But it's very shallow. I mean, I feel like he would get bored of it. Like, it doesn't feel like that's, like, a core personality trait of his.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. And then, of course, like, we have this unspoken, like, you know, well, I don't know, this unspoken thing that's going on then by the end, and we'll talk about that more between Carm and Tony, right? They both know this information about each other. Yeah. The information that Carmela knows is based on these really trashy fingernails that Valentina wears, and they focus a lot on her fingernails.
Well, they also focus on Carmela's fingernails.
They do, but in a different way. Like, Valentina's are more, like, animalistic, and I think that's kind of what I'm thinking about in terms of, like, this link to animals. But they are. She also wears, like, a lot of fur coats. She wears like this, like, leopard one, then she has these, like, furry coats. Yeah. So I don't know what they're trying. Like, something about I don't know, like, more like base instincts or desires or something like that. Well, it's not
the first time they've linked one of Tony's partners with animals. I mean, think about the snakes, the kind of cold-blooded reptiles with Gloria.
Yeah, but this is just what I'm trying to work through, and it's hard to do this on the spot. But there is something, again, that's drawing him to her, because we know that Tony really likes animals, right? And we've talked about what animals kind of represent for him. He's clearly going through this thing this season, right? Like, with the death of Gloria and with his relationship with Carmela being what it is right now, with her putting this pressure on him to, you know, have these legit financial trusts and stuff like that, and hiding his money, and finances not being as good after 9/11. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to see like how that relates to like then being drawn to someone, and plus the Ralphie element, being drawn to someone like Valentina who's associated with animals.
Well, I think that Tony is drawn to animals, and we've talked about this because of the simplicity of the relationship, the fact that they don't challenge him back. And as he is having domestic issues, especially in this season that largely focuses on rifts between Tony and Carmela, I think that we're starting to see a commonality of a lack of challenging well, in some ways, a lack of challenging relationships from his Gumars. It turns out that they all kind of blow up and challenge him in ways, but he always has the ability to just pick up and leave. In fact, as soon as they kind of challenge who he is or become something deeper than a kind of shallow, fun relationship, he's not really interested in it anymore. So it's kind of similar to the animals because they're these just kind of fun sexual romps for him. Like
similar to the animals.
Well, not in the sexual part, but
okay.
in the lack of challenge to himself.
Yeah. But I don't know, like there is something too, like we see him like in the episode close to the end after they meet and Tony drinks a Diet Coke and she's like, I broke up with Ralphie, and he turns her down, right?
Interesting. He drinks a Diet Coke in this episode because he
Diet
also
Coke,
asked for decaf at the end.
Yeah, it was
which are not normal things that he has.
I know. I was thinking about that too. But then we see him like wandering the mall. Right?
They have had that in this season though, with him being on a diet near the beginning, and
he looks slim right now. He was wearing that red shirt.
I'll get into that. Don't you worry.
Yeah. Just thought I'd spoil it.
I don't need the alley-oop. I got it. I'm all ready.
Sorry. Yeah. Here's an alley-oop for some color stuff. No, but then we like see him wandering around this mall, and that's when he takes out her business card a number of times during this episode, right? To kind of like, when he's thinking of her, call her. I don't know. So there's something else there that she gives him, and it is kind of like he's searching for something in this kind of like meaningless.
Yeah.
Like a world that for him doesn't really have much meaning. And that's, I think, kind of like what this season is indicating to me. Like, because it is these kind of like small stories. There isn't a lot of plot development. And of course, like we can always look at this show, we can think about it in terms of like whose perspective things are from. And if we think about it from Tony's perspective, it is kind of this like meaningless, nothing's really happening for him, right?
Yeah.
He's kind of like out of the action because of the court case and whatever. They're like buying and selling properties, right? So, he is, I think, seeking something to make him feel like he felt when he was with Gloria, which was kind of exciting. I don't know. Anyways, I can't quite figure it out, but
yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, there is also a link, like that's a very direct link between her and animals too, not only in the clothing, but like when he actually gets slapped by her and you think it's over by him saying, well, I already took his horse. And then the fact that she comes back to him and it seems fine. They're both happy about it. Like they're not challenging relationships to him.
No. Well, and then there's the Icelandic woman, right, who we see briefly in this episode.
And we find out from her that
she's
minding your
facts.
P's and Q's is about drinking.
Yeah.
Thank you.
She sounds like she has a little bit of an Irish accent, which I don't know where that comes from. But Icelandic accents are...
It's actually interesting, though, that she is proposing these facts and that she is like somebody with knowledge, and then she's not the person who Tony chooses to spend his time with.
Yeah, no, he's like not excited by that.
I think that education is actually something that gets fixated on a little bit in this episode too, between Polly, between the principal that he goes to visit.
He's singing "We Don't Need No Education,"
and actually those are the words he doesn't know, because he actually, when he's singing, "We don't need no," and I wrote it down, do da dee da, another, and which is coming from another brick in the wall.
Yeah.
But we don't need no education is the word he forgets. We don't need no thought control. The fact that he forgets those words is indicative of his lack of education and his link to Polly, who also discusses in this episode how grade 9 was his last. He ends up bullying this principal.
Yeah.
There was a lot happening.
The principal gets really mad at that guy for his shoes.
Yeah.
And his shoelaces.
We don't need no dude.
Doo-da-dee-da.
Good thing I wrote that down.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. And the conversation with Melfi about the Gumars is really interesting too, because we kind of jump into their conversation there where she says to Tony, well, don't you think you might just be feeling guilty or something along those lines, right? And then they get into this, then their session's over very abruptly after we kind of enter this scene, right?
Yeah.
We come in very close to the end, and she says that. And then he's really, perplexed by this masochism thing that's going on with Ralphie, and he has a lot of questions about that.
He sure does have a lot of questions about...
And then he talks to his own sister about it, which, ew.
Well, he pays his own sister for it. That's a great scene, actually. It's
Yeah.
interesting.
Janice
I love
is
Janice
so great.
pressing the shirt. So actually being at home in her own environment and actually embracing some of those motherly attributes that she was kind of putting on as a farce earlier on in the season, actually doing that on her own time, not to show and fake it to anybody, but actually doing it. But at the same time on TV is what I think is BattleBots.
I think so.
If I have to test my early 2000s
It looked like some
battling
kind of
robot
BattleBots.
competition shows. I think it was BattleBots, which just shows that at heart she is this kind of monster rally type person that, it has not been shaken yet. But there's some great things in the composition of that shot, even when Tony and Janice are talking to each other, when Tony is smirking and we see Janice acting through this, basically knowing that she has something to get from it. There's a cross in the background behind her, which is really interesting as she manipulates Tony to get what she wants, which is $3,000. When we think about her manipulating Faith in terms of her identity and her schemes to come up with money through Christian rock, it's funny that there's this symbol of faith and religion behind her as she is manipulating Tony to pay her to talk about whatever the fuck they're doing.
Interesting. Yeah.
All
it
that,
is.
all
I
that
love
stuff.
how she puts up a tiny little bit of a fight. It's pretty funny. What about Carmela in this episode? And Carmela and Furio.
Yeah.
What's going on there? There's a lot. There's one really weird part, I guess, for me, and where Tony, I guess, is putting in this theater system in their house. And it shows a Harrison Ford movie, and then there's all this. Oh, thank you. And is it also The Fugitive at the end of?
I think it's the same movie. Yeah,
it's the same movie.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just bookended by Harrison Ford. This scene.
Why not?
I mean, totally. Why not? The Fugitive, interesting. But we have he's testing out all the systems, and then Carmela comes in, and they have this conversation, and this bagpipe music
I know
is blasting, and we can't even hear the characters, and so I don't know and so clearly this theater system costs a lot of money.
Yeah.
Is that in their pool house? Where is that?
Yeah, it's in a separate house. I feel like it's representative of what's happening in the family. There's a sense of unease and a sense of exoticness where they're just nothing is in place with the bagpipe music. There's just kind of something wrong about it. I also feel when he's watching the Harrison Ford movie, it reminds me of his conversation with Melfi where he says he was watching Seven and he couldn't get through it. And now he's investing in a home theater system watching, Hollywood similar movies. So he clearly hasn't learned his lesson, because that's something that Melfi commended him on and said, well, good for you. There's just all these distractions. But in season 4, he's just engaging in more distractions, whether be it a relationship or a movie. He's smoking a cigar and he falls asleep and he wakes up and he watches the movie some more.
Eats some popcorn.
But yeah, there's just this kind of cycle of nothingness. And I feel like he's just engaging in now constructing a temple of nothingness, really. But he hasn't grown as a character through the 4 seasons that we've known him. If anything, he's been regressing. And he doesn't even have a conversation with Carmela, which is ironic because when the guy's there, he talks about we can watch movies as a family now, which is directly correlated with bagpipe music happening, and he can't even talk to his wife.
Yeah.
So we know that there's these rifts happening between him and Carmela, and yet this thing that's supposed to bring together the family is actually making it impossible for them to even hear each other.
Yeah, there's something to that where it was we kind of see Carm break in this episode, right? She Edie Falco puts on those crazy eyes a couple times, which I love when she does
Great
that.
acting.
But Tony also mentions that to Valentina. He's like, I'm a happily married man with 2 kids, kind of thing. So he's really
that doesn't hold up for very long.
It doesn't. It doesn't. You're right. But yeah, that scene was really interesting. And then we have a couple so we have some glimpses, like I said, into Tony's psyche in this episode. But we also get Carm, right? So when they're sitting at the restaurant with Brian and his wife earlier in the episode, we have this moment of her point of view where she's like focusing in on this art that's at Vesuvio's, right? This like Italian scene, like gondolas and stuff, I think, basically. And she's hearing that amazing song that played at Furio's party. Yeah, it's a great, really repetitive song. I guess so she hears
and she also sings it in the shower.
She does, which is a good catch. But yeah, so we have her perspective on that one, right? We're hearing what's in her head and we're seeing what's in her eyes. And was there another one later? Then there was there was the other time where she was imagining her and Furio dancing together, and it's like in this like black background. And it's when she has Mario Batali on the TV,
right? And
she sees his ponytail, cue the amazing song again, and her and Furio, this image of her and Furio dancing in this black space.
It's a beautiful fantasy.
It's really, and then so we have her experiencing these things at the same time as she's found out / confirmed her assumptions that Tony's seeing somebody, right, by finding this nail. She leaves it on his table, which is really passive aggressive.
It is. They're
both really passive aggressive to each other, and because of course then we also have her taking like $50,000 from so it was like basically like just under 50K, right? Yeah. There was 2 payments of 9.9 to one of the guys, and then the rest, there was 3 other payments of 9.9. So that's about 50,000,
We're close.
Somewhere around there, from the bird feed container that's out back. So I don't know. We have these really,
which is interesting because she goes to get the money when Tony is singing in the shower. No, do da dee da, and Tony is the one who pours water on her when she's singing about her Furio fantasy.
Right.
So they're both kind of trapped in their own fantasy worlds.
And pouring water on each other's fantasies in some, like, you know what I mean? Like, kind of like,
Well, they're unaware of them, too.
Yeah. But, I mean, in, kind of that unaware way, they're, like, putting a damper on each other's fantasies and each other's kind of ways of living their most honest life, I guess. Like,
Well, they're also taking them as opportunities to get what they want.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting that scene is interesting when Tony pours water on her, because it does, like, he does kind of have this lightheartedness about him, like he feels like this is going to be a funny joke.
Yeah.
I don't think he means it in a malicious way whatsoever. But then Carm's really upset, and she comes out and has that line like, you promised that you wouldn't do this on our honeymoon.
How about you can keep this one promise?
I wish you could keep just one promise, and that just like shifts it entirely.
Yeah.
To this, this really darker thing. And we have her having that conversation, like we mentioned earlier, with Rosalie at the diaper drive, which is a really strange scene when they keep getting newborn diapers. Don't know about that. But they talk, that's when she says, like, Rosalie says, like, it was their choice to have babies without husbands or something like that. And then Carm has that, not a feminist. We put up with these Gumars. Tony pulls people. That was one of those other lines that I thought was really, like, I don't know, again, like, hard hitting, like, well, Tony pulls people into his circle, right? And so she's being really honest about kind of the way it is. And Tony talks about that too with Melfi, right? Or is it with Melfi? When he talks about how, like, back in the day they would take their Gumars out on Friday and their wives out on Saturday, or vice versa. Or is
it the other way around?
Yeah.
He didn't even know. And that's the ironic thing too about those principles, like for something that was supposed to be so important to his family, that, like, to the family of the mob, that he doesn't actually even remember the details.
Yeah.
Is indicative of something.
Before he dumps water on Carm, though, we have this scene of him looking at himself in the mirror, which is always kind of meaningful in this show, and we get Tony in his bathroom mirror.
And what does he see?
He kind of like smirks at himself. It's kind of when he's coming up with this idea
Right.
for pouring this water, right?
Right.
He then like puts a cup in the sink and fills it with water
Right.
while he's standing over there. So I just noted it. I didn't I don't quite know what it means, like how he's seeing himself, or we often see him looking at himself in the mirror before he takes Prozac, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so I think like he's like trying to find these ways to make himself happy, but he keeps like falling back in the same kind of traps,
Yeah.
again and again. Yeah, something like that.
Interesting. Yeah, totally. I feel like there's a lot of focus on money in this episode, especially at the very beginning of the episode of everything that happens. Like Furio talking about his dad's cancer, and Tony is incapable of listening. He interrupts and says, "You want any money?" and pulls out money to kind of give to him, which is clearly not what Furio wants. And then shortly after, there's Brian and Tony talking about money. Brian's girlfriend saying that's all he ever wants to talk about. Carm is asking about the Freelinghuisen property. Like the fact that money is just governing all of these characters and their trajectories and their desires. It's kind of all they can see, and I think a lot of them feel that it can solve all their problems. Carm is actually being very financially driven. She's asserting her independence through financial means in this episode. Is interesting. But what I feel like a lot of them need, in particular Furio, cue his sad olive story, is something more emotional. So he is seeing something in Carmela, supposedly.
He loves her, apparently.
He loves her. Yeah.
Which was pretty that was kind of like Valentina. Like that was kind of desperate.
Yeah.
I don't know, or something. Like
Yeah.
how does he
He's
love
a very
her?
emotional character.
He is
I
a
guess
very emotional
he has a
character.
ponytail.
He dances,
He's
but like
European.
it's I don't know, this whole like that whole storyline's still kind of like I don't know.
It's a little bit fantastical, and it's even presented that way.
Which I like.
Yeah.
Which I like, but I do have my kind of like weirds about it, if you know.
Well, it's funny, like even we've talked about this in this show before, like some of the narrative choices are rather bold and interesting in a weird way. When you think about some of the choices they make, they're strange. Like some of the plots are a little odd. For instance, in this, Polly's mom is at Green Grove and doesn't get along socially, so she's sad. And Polly,
I didn't take a lot of notes on that, so.
Well, it's just it's not what you would expect from a show about the New Jersey mob.
Right.
And so, again, this show kind of being in the peak of its popularity, to choose to engage in stories like that it's interesting. They choose things that are not obvious.
It's kind of linked into the, like, I don't know, like they talk about it being kind of like high school. And for me, it was kind of like linked into that.
Yeah, it is.
In some way. But yeah, I didn't like jot down a lot on that.
Yeah.
Cookie, she's really mean.
Yeah. So mean. Cookie.
Yeah.
And Min Matrone.
I know. Min.
I won't even use the words Polly used to describe that.
Yeah.
What
about
else?
your colors? You want?
Well, at the very end, I think
we get more
really,
reds and blues again.
Yeah, I think that they're representing the separation that's happening between Tony and Carmela. The fact that Carmela is wearing a very distinct blue, Tony is wearing a very distinct red. The fact that they're both wearing strong primary colors that are unmatched. I feel like there's no middle ground that's happening between them right now. Like they both have
purple.
Yeah, exactly. But there is no middle ground. They're both in their kind of fantasy worlds. They're both pursuing their own fantasies. Yeah. And they're not discussing their issues, and they're not finding where they can meet or have their own relationship. And I think it's driving them apart. They're going in different directions right now.
Yeah.
And I think that is an issue. There's no kind of honesty. There's no openness about it. Is there nothing you want to talk about? Like what? And that's what we're left with.
Yeah.
That kind of lack of closure, that lack of communication, and that's going to be a problem. And I think the colors were just a really interesting way to represent that.
Yeah, I agree.
AJ comes down kind of wearing black, but then he just like gets out of there. He's like, I'm out of here. He wants nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
He can sense the fact that there's something unaddressed and that there's issues there.
Yep.
But I thought it was effective to have the two primary colors, these kind of very strong, unmatched, pure colors that are represented on both of them, and in a situation where they are not finding any common ground.
Yeah.
I liked it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't really have too much else.
I'm looking forward to next episode.
Yeah, me too. And I think this episode, like, we don't want to give away lots of spoilers, and we try not to, but, like, there definitely are a lot of connections between this episode and the next.
Yeah, totally.
So we'll reflect back on those when we talk about the next episode.
Yeah.
Something I want to reflect on from this episode is when Syl comes to, I guess, the Bing, like he and Christopher come, he brings a tub of little mozzarella balls. And it's a big one.
He likes cheese, though. Remember? Harlesburg?
Yeah, but I think that's a great snack.
That's true, it is.
It looked really good.
Silvio just likes his cheese. He
Yeah.
likes Harlesburg at his fucking feet.
Yeah, but I think this is even better than that.
He's maturing. He's progressing.
Yeah.
The
and
others
just, like,
are
the
regressing.
thought of, like, eating mozzarella out of it, like, just, like, as a snack, like, reaching into a tub and
It's
pulling
genius.
out. Yeah.
It's incredible.
I wouldn't share it with someone else's fingers, though. You know what I mean?
That's disgusting, and the thought actually of putting even your own fingers in it is a little weird.
I know. That's what I'm saying.
Polly
It's
Walnuts wouldn't eat it.
a great choice of snack.
Nor would Tony Sirico as a real person. Well, thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you for listening.
We'll be back. We're progressing rapidly through season 4.
Well, for you, it's just
at
the
normal
same
time.
We're trying to take advantage of January.
It's January. This is our Sopranos time.
Yeah.
When
So,
possible.
yeah, like we said, let us know if you have any thoughts.
Yeah.
And we will see you for our next episode, which is called
Whoever did this, I believe.
Whoever Did This.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
See you
Okay.
soon.
Bye.
Bye.